We're going to be discussing famous prayer of Kol Nidre, with which we usher in Yom Kippur. But before we do that, I want to play a rendition by the famous cantor Yosef Rosenblatt, who was probably the greatest cantor of all times. I've heard this from a cantor just recently, that there was never anyone like him, and will never be anyone like him in the future. That's how high regard he's held. I don't know if the recordings do justice to his voice, but this is it. Just one dead. Very powerful.
Where was that from? Was that from
What?
New York? Or?
Where was he when he recorded this?
Probably in a recording studio.
Probably. It wasn't live, because
He made a lot of vadat.
right, he wouldn't have been singing with music on Yom Kippur.
What year was it, though?
I don't know. It's in the early 20th century.
His name?
Yosef Rosenblatt. He was the greatest cantor, that acknowledged by everyone who knows anything about cantorial music. Let me just share a little story I heard from a cantor about him. When he was a child of 5 years old, he was singing in the presence of a great Hasidic Rebbe. I think it was the Shinova Rebbe, Rabbi Halberstam, a very holy man. And there's in the Grace After Meals, there's a paragraph that is recited only on the Sabbath or a holiday. And he started singing that passage. So the Rebbe says to him, "Why are you singing that passage? It's not a holiday today." And he said, "In your presence, when you are here, it's a holiday." This is the 5-year-old child. So the Rebbe says to him, "One day you'll be world famous." And he did. At any rate, question, what is Yom Kippur? Everyone certainly knows about Yom Kippur, however you pronounce it. Historically, it's when Moses came down for the third time from Mount Sinai with the second set of tablets, which indicated that God had forgiven the people for their role in the golden calf. And as a result, it became the Day of Atonement for all future generations. It demonstrated to us the power of forgiveness. You can't think of a worse sin, a more egregious sin than worshiping a golden calf 40 days after they heard God speak to them directly, do not have any other gods. And yet they bounced back. That's what Yom Kippur is. It's such a powerful day. You could bounce back no matter how far you descend, no matter how far you stray, no matter how far you degrade yourself. God will always embrace us and take us back. It's also referred to as the wedding. It's the giving of the Torah anew, because the Torah that they got originally, the first tablets were shattered, and here's the second tablets. So it's referred to as the wedding between God and the Jewish people. And this idea of the wedding is further demonstrated by referring to the high priest who would enter the Holy of Holies as entering into the bedroom, being intimate with God. So Yom Kippur is a day of when we enjoy intimacy with God more than any other time. Yes?
Rabbi, isn't it also a wedding in the sense of that the first tablet is purely from God, while the second one,
the stone
down, is a wedding between that Moshe participated in the making of that.
Yes, that's true. That's true. It had a certain advantage over the first set of tablets, even though it's seemingly a disadvantage. So here we're talking about a day that's not just a holiday. We're talking about a day when we enjoy the most intimate relationship with God. God forgives us no matter how far we've gone. We're like angels on this day. There's a certain prayer that we always say quietly when we recite the Shema, the second verse, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso Olam Vayed, blessed be the name of his kingdom forever and ever. That we say quietly. And the reason why we say that quietly is because Moses appropriated that from the angels. He stole it from them. And in order not to get the angels upset when we recite it, we say it quietly. But in Yom Kippur, we say it out loud because we're like angels at Yom Kippur. That means no matter who we are, we're so pure that the angels don't even think of us as being their rivals anymore. We're not taking anything away from them because we're one of them. On Yom Kippur we have 5 prayers. Every day we have 3 prayers. Shabbat we have, and holidays we have 4. Yom Kippur we have 5. And the 5 prayers are said to correspond to the 5 levels of the soul, including the Yechida, the essence of the soul, that's revealed on Yom Kippur more than any other time. There are some Hasidic Jews, not included Chabad, but there is a custom amongst Hasidic Jews that they don't even say the name Yom Kippur. To them it's so holy they wouldn't even say it. They'll call it the holy day, the Yom HaKadosh, the holy day, because it has such power in it. And even though that's not a universal custom, it just tells you how profound the holiness of this day is. It's so awesome. Although the word awesome is not awesome anymore. But when awesome used to be awesome, Yom Kippur fit into the word awesome more than any other day of the year. So here's the question then. So why do we say Kol Nidre? Why do we usher in Yom Kippur with Kol Nidre? In what way does Kol Nidre reflect anything about Yom Kippur? It doesn't mention anything about repentance, tshuva, return. Prayer has 3 components to it. There's the part of prayer where we ask God for things, where we praise Him, and where we express gratitude. None of those elements of prayer are inherent in the Kol Nidre prayer. It's written, not even written in the holy tongue in Hebrew, it's written in Aramaic, which is considered to be the language of exile. And what is its content? It's a legal declaration in which we renounce our vows and our oaths and our commitments, in other words. So why start the holiest day of the year with this very non-spiritual, anything sophisticated, spiritually speaking, declaration? That's question number 1. Question number 2, it sounds a little strange, and even anti-Semites sees us and says, "Oh, you Jews, you don't keep any of your promises. You have a gimmick. It comes to Yom Kippur, you renounce all your commitments, all your promises. So you promise to pay your bills, you're not paying your bills. You promise to pay taxes, you're not going to pay your taxes." So this left room for anti-Semites to charge us that we're not honest people. We don't keep our word. Now, there's a myth that this prayer was composed by the Conversos, otherwise known sometimes in the not very nice word, Moranos. The Conversos were Jews who were forced into converting to Catholicism during the Inquisition in the 15th century and beyond. And they felt very guilty at having made pledges and vows to the church. So at the Yom Kippur night, when they would gather in their cellars secretly, they composed the words of Kol Nidre to say to God, God, my promises, my vows to the church were not sincere. We don't really believe in that stuff. We're still Jews. We're still very much part of the Jewish community. But that's a myth, because Kol Nidre was composed over 1,000 years ago. So it couldn't be from the 15th century. The only kernel of truth could be is that when they said Kol Nidre, they really said it with a lot of fervor, with a lot of inspiration, because of what the vows that they would make, and they realized that those vows are something that they didn't feel comfortable with. So that might be the kernel of truth. But Kol Nidre goes back well over 1,000 years. It's hinted in the Talmud and in the Zohar as well. But it didn't come to popularization of it until about 1,100 years ago. But also there are certain exceptions to this rule. When you're announcing your vows, it doesn't have any effect on your commitments to other people. In other words, if I made a commitment to you, then I'm going to give you something. I can't come Yom Kippur and say, that vow doesn't mean anything, that commitment doesn't mean anything. It's only my commitment. Let's say I'm making a commitment to God that I'm going to wake up a half hour earlier so I could study Torah a half hour early. Okay, that's a commitment that sometimes I might make. Someone might make that commitment and they feel that they didn't have the ability to maintain it, to keep it, for whatever reasons. That's the kind of vows that we're talking about that we could annul, but also it's only really annuls the vows that we don't remember. We always make commitments. We always say things. We're going to do something. So if you make a commitment, you're going to do something, a positive thing. You're going to volunteer in a hospital or whatever. You don't even remember making that commitment. So those are the commitments that are annulled. The violation of those would not be a violation because they had been annulled. Now the way it works is just the order of when way things are done is that when you annul vows, this is not only Yom Kippur, there's a law in the Torah that if a person makes a vow, the way to annul it is to come to 3 rabbis, and they form a court, a tribunal, and you come to the rabbis and you say that I made this vow and I regret having made it, and they question you about whether you really would have made the vow had you known the consequences of it. And when you tell them, no, I would not have made the vow, they have the right to annul the vow. Now where does that come from? That's based on a biblical commandment, the way it's been transmitted through the oral tradition, that vows that you undertake on your own, prohibitions that you make yourself that are not mandated by the Torah. The Torah doesn't mandate certain things, but you said you're not going to do certain things. Person, let's say, decided that they don't want to eat meat anymore, and they make a vow that they're not going to eat meat. The Torah didn't say that you can't eat meat as long as it's kosher. But you said, I don't want to eat meat. You made a vow. So it becomes a prohibition. For you to eat that piece of meat is like eating a piece of pork. But here the Torah allows you to annul it. And that was based on an oral tradition with hints in the Torah. So the entire congregation forms the tribunal. So everyone is sitting there as the cantor is chanting Kol Nidre. Everyone is part of the tribunal that annuls the vows. A preliminary psalm is recited to get us into the spirit. And then in an undertone, although some places the cantor makes a whole big deal about it, the Rebbe was very much against making a big deal about this, because it's a statement that you say that we're giving the permission for even violators of the law to participate. You don't want to highlight the violators of the law in public. You don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. So it's said quietly in an undertone, and then we recite the Kol Nidre to this tune that you just heard, although there are variations of that tune. In Ashkenazi communities, Sephardic communities have a different tune, I think. the ones who say Kol Nidre. And Kol Nidre is recited 3 times. Each time you sing it, the cantor goes louder and louder. First he sings it in almost like a whisper, and everyone chants along quietly, not to disturb the cantor, but everyone joins. That's the formality. Here's the translation. You can read it, and it lists all the different names that are used for vows in the Talmud. All vows, prohibitions, oaths, consecrations, konams, konase, and any synonymous terms that we may vow or swear or consecrate or prohibit upon ourselves from this day of atonement until the next day of atonement that will come for our benefit. That's an awkward translation. That means we're saying that from this Yom Kippur to next one may be a good year. That's essentially what it's saying. Regarding all of them, we repudiate them. All of them are undone, abandoned, canceled, null and void, not in force and not in effect. Our vows are no longer vows, and our prohibitions are no longer prohibitions, and our oaths are no longer oaths. This is essentially what Kol Nidre is. Now there are 2 versions of Kol Nidre. One version focused on the past, that all the vows that we have made in the past should become null and void retroactively. And there's another version that speaks about the future, that all vows that we will make in the forthcoming year shall already be null and void. We're canceling them ahead of time. So there are 2 versions of Kol Nidre. But the question number 1 is, how could you annul a vow? If it's a solemn vow, how could you annul it? So the answer is, if it was a prohibition that the Torah prohibits, a rabbi has no right to cancel a law. If someone comes to the rabbi and says, "I like to eat some pork, could you give me a dispensation?" If your life is in danger and the only way to save your life is by eating a piece of pork, then it's a mitzvah to eat it. But if it's not a matter of life and death, the rabbi has 0 power to change any laws. In other religions, the clerics have the power to give you a dispensation. That doesn't exist in Judaism. But there's one exception to that rule, and that is a vow. Even though it becomes a commandment, you're not allowed to violate. It's a biblical commandment not to violate your vows. So if someone makes a vow not to eat a piece of kosher meat, for him it's not kosher, but you could rescind that vow. The Torah gives us the power. Now, why do we focus on that as we enter into Yom Kippur? That's the big question that we're asking. So there are many different approaches, and I'm going to list a few of those approaches. The first approach is the legalistic one, given by the famous Talmudic genius known as the Rogachover. He was the rabbi in the city of Debunking in Latvia. He passed away in the 1930s, and he was like the greatest Talmudic genius of his generation. And he writes, based on models in the Talmud, that wherever there was a dispute between the rabbis and the Sadducees, who didn't accept the oral Torah, whenever there was a dispute, they made a big deal out of those ceremonies. For example, there was a whole ceremony when they would cut the grain, the barley, for the Omer offering. The rabbi interpreted the Torahs to mean that you're supposed to bring the Omer, the barley offering, the day after Passover, the day after the first day of Passover. The Sadducees said, no, it's the day after the Sabbath. So whenever they would cut the grain, they made a big fanfare, a lot of big commotion, so that everyone should know we're doing it this way, this is the right way to do it. When you light the Shabbos candles, we make a big deal of lighting Shabbos candles. One of the reasons for lighting Shabbos candles, there are many reasons, I'm going to only list the one that's relevant here, is that the Sadducees, well later on the Karaites, who didn't accept the oral law, would eat cold food in the cold and in the dark Friday night. Because the Torah says don't light a fire in your dwelling places. They took it literally, you can't have a fire burning in your house on Shabbat. Well, if you can't have a fire, then you can't eat warm food, you can't have any light, and you can't have any heat. If it's freezing cold in the winter, you have to just sit there in the cold. And to repudiate that, we light Shabbos candles precisely before the Sabbath begins to make sure that the fire continues to burn during the Sabbath. And that's why we eat hot foods on Shabbos. You may have heard of the delicacy called Shalom. Who has not heard of Shalom? Cholent, okay, that's all right. Cholent is food that you leave on the fire all night long, and it stews until you're ready to eat it Shabbos afternoon. Why do we eat hot food? And some say if you don't eat hot food on Shabbos, it's a sign that you might be a hidden Karaite. to repudiate their belief that you're not allowed to have hot food.
You okay?
Sort of.
You want me to get your cold thing on?
Okay, I have to mute. Let's go through some of the other less legalistic reasons. Famous Rabbi Soloveitchik says that it's a demonstration that you're thoroughly embarrassed with your past sins. In other words, when you're talking about the vows, indirectly you're talking about all the things that you did wrong in the past. And you're publicly saying that I renounce all of those things. He's talking about the formula where you do it, the focus on the past. So when a person wants to do tshuva, when he wants to repent, part of tshuva is embarrassment. You're embarrassed with your behavior. If you are not embarrassed with your behavior, then the regret, the remorse is incomplete. If someone commits a crime and says, I won't do it anymore, but it doesn't bother me, you know, I'm not remorseful, it doesn't bother me, I'm not ashamed of myself. Well, that's a sign that you are not a moral person. You're amoral or immoral, or whichever one fits better. Because a human being has a conscience. And if you have a conscience, you're going to feel very uncomfortable when you realize that you did something wrong. And this is one way, when we renounce the past vows, we're saying, I'm embarrassed with all these commitments that I made that I didn't keep, and I now have to renounce them. And then he says, another thing Rabbi Soloveitchik added, when a court convenes, the Talmud says, based on a biblical verse, God's presence, the Shekhinah, enters into the courtroom. Judges are not judging on their own. They're judging with the support of God. So anytime you have a tribunal, the judges sit with great awe. They're not supposed to kibitz, they're not supposed to joke around, because they're in the presence of God more than any other situation. So here we invite the entire congregation to become part of that tribunal. The divine presence is here, and we're bringing him into the day. We're ushering in the divine presence into Yom Kippur. And that's why we sound the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur, because just like at Mount Sinai, when the Shekhinah, the divine presence, was there, at the end of the entire giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, the shofar was sounded. Why was the shofar sounded? Because it was an indication that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is now departing. You can now relax. You don't have to be so uptight and in awe, because the divine presence is there. When you're in the presence of God, you feel that presence. God is present all over. We should never make that mistake to think that God is only present in certain situations. But there are certain times and certain places where we're more receptive to feeling his presence, and that's what we want to do on Yom Kippur. So we sound the shofar at the end as a way of saying the divine presence has been here all day. But how do we bring in the divine presence? By creating a tribunal where everyone becomes part of that tribunal. That's Rabbi Soloveitchik's, one of his explanations. Another explanation given by a colleague of mine, Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. In a way, it's about the entrenched, self-defeating attitudes. And we commit ourselves, we link ourselves to a mindset that we are forever limited and we cannot actualize our real potential. And subconsciously, he says, we swear to ourselves. You don't even have to articulate this. Well, you do it to yourself subconsciously, that we're incapable of being anything, of achieving any goals. So we bind ourselves, we shackle ourselves to this mindset. And as a result of that mindset, you can't change. Because I'm tied up. How could I change? I'm chained to the wall. There's no way that I could separate myself from my past and from my real inadequacies. That's the vows that we make. The vows don't have to be the ones that you actually say to yourself, that you say out loud, I'm going to do this. The vows that you tell yourself, I'm inadequate, and I'll always remain that way. And this is this analogy to the Conversos. They made vows, and they realized that those vows were wrong. We make all sorts of vows subconsciously about our inadequacies, about a lot of things in our lives that are limiting. And that's the connection to tshuva. Yes, Kol Nidre doesn't mention the word tshuva, return, repentance, but the whole idea is tshuva. The whole idea is that you're separating the chains that connect you to the negatives of your lives, whether the negatives are yourself denying your own qualities, your own potential, or the negatives are otherwise. You're severing those connections. And the Rebbe, I just heard this a few days ago, quoted his father-in-law that just like a person has to know faults, they have to know their own virtues. So the Rebbe asked the question, the previous Rebbe's language was you have to know faults, not your own faults, but you have to know your own qualities. The word own, he only used when he spoke about qualities. When he used the word faults, he left out the word your own. You have to know faults. You have to know what a fault is, what a deficiency is. But they're not yours. You have to know that they're not really yours. Because you are not inherently negative. The negatives are a superimposition on you that don't define who you are. The qualities, they're yours. And most people think the other way around. Most people are so harsh on themselves. They feel their inadequacies. That's me. I'm a loser. I mean, that expression is a very common expression. People will refer to others and themselves as being losers. And if they have some gifts and some positive qualities, yeah, once in a while I do something right. Not everyone is like that, mind you, but there are many people like that, yes.
Rabbi, is that related to the idea that we are our divine soul and the rest is not truly us?
Yes, that's exactly what it's based on. Because the true essence is the divine in us. The other stuff is added on to us. And that's not really what defines us. I think I told the story once before. There was a chassid of another Rebbe, the Satmar, who came to our Rebbe for a blessing. That's a separate story. He came to the Satmar Rebbe for a blessing for something, but I don't know what it was, and the Satmar said, I can't help you, go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, even though ideologically they were very far apart. And he comes to our Rebbe, and the Rebbe gave him the blessing, and my Rebbe says to him, could you tell me something that your Rebbe said recently? He said, yes, I remember he spoke about a passage in the Talmud that the sinners of Israel are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. That's why we eat a pomegranate on Rosh Hashanah, because it's filled with seeds to indicate we're filled with mitzvahs. And the Rebbe says, so what did he say about that passage? He said he asked a question. What was the question? How could he be filled with mitzvahs if he's called a sinner of Israel? So the Rebbe became very serious, and the Rebbe says, I asked a similar question, just the other way around. How could he be called a sinner of Israel if he's full of mitzvahs? See the difference in the perspective. Yeah. You're a sinner of Israel, so how could you call having mitzvahs? The Rebbe says, no, you're full of mitzvahs. How could you be called a sinner of Israel? And the answer to that question, the Rebbe gave on another occasion. It's like filling up a glass with water, and it's full now, and you add more water. What happens to the excess water? It pours out on the outside. Yes, even a person filled with mitzvahs could have sins, but they're on the outside. They're peripheral. They're not in you. They don't define you. And it comes Yom Kippur, and we think of ourselves as being these terrible sinners, and we can't change because we're bound to it. There are ropes and chains that keep us connected. Kol Nidre says, no, all these ropes are gone. Another thing Rabbi Soloveitchik said, and this focuses on the formula that we rescind the past vows. Yom Kippur is about total transformation of your identity. You're a new person. Your past vows keep you connected to the past. Yom Kippur is about severing your connection. I think it's the same idea also in Rosh Hashanah being the head of the year, yet in the Torah it's referred to as the 7th month. So how could it be the head of the year, middle of the year? There are 12 months in the year, and this is the beginning of the 7th month. And yet you're calling it the beginning of the year, the head of the year, because Rosh Hashanah is also about starting a new identity. Yes, you have your past, but now you're acquiring a new identity, and that becomes perfected at Yom Kippur, at Kol Nidre. The Rebbe takes the same idea. I don't think he applies it to Kol Nidre, but he uses the idea of transformation and explains why there's a law, a strange law. The high priest would wear 8 vestments, golden garments, but on Yom Kippur, when he did the special service of Yom Kippur, he would wear white linen, simple garments. So it would be a new garment he got for Yom Kippur. He couldn't use it next year. He had to buy a new set of garments. All the other garments, he could use the same garments for life. But the ones on Yom Kippur, he had to use new garments every year. Why was that so important to have a new garment every year? So the Rebbe says, because the whole idea of Yom Kippur and the whole role of the high priest was to initiate this total transformation, this rebirth. And the chamber in which he would stay in the week before Yom Kippur was called the changing chamber. And the Rebbe explains that the simple reason for it changing is because the high priest would change almost every year. They wouldn't stay, it wouldn't last very long in the Second Temple era. But the Rebbe says, no, it's a deeper idea, that the high priest initiates a total transformation. The Tzemach Tzedek, he was the 3rd Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe's great-great-great-great-grandfather, who, in one of his writings, says that the whole idea of annulling vows is a paradigm, and it represents the power to transform the past. We're bound by time. We don't have a time machine. We can go back in time and change everything. So far in science fiction it exists, but in reality, so far we don't have that ability. That's what we think. And the Torah tells us otherwise. We do have the ability to transform the past with tshuva. Tshuva is not just about the future, it's about the past. If you do the right kind of tshuva, intense tshuva, out of love, all the negatives of the past are transformed into positives. But that's the past. So up until the Yom Kippur, up until you do tshuva, you have a lot of baggage, negative baggage. And all of a sudden, not only do you get rid of the negative baggage, but it becomes positive baggage. That power, where do we find a model of that power? The model is annulling a vow. I'll give you an example. How this works in real life. If someone gets married and he says to his wife, as he gives her the ring, he makes a condition. I am marrying you on the condition that you do not have any outstanding vows. And she does. She made vows that the husband would not want to be married to a woman who had those vows. So the marriage would not take effect, because the marriage was based on a stipulation that she doesn't have those vows. And then she realizes, you know what? I'm not going to be married to this guy. So she goes to 3 rabbis and she has the vows annulled. And the marriage is retroactively valid, because even though at the time that he married her, she had those vows, they're retroactively canceled. It takes effect retroactively. That's the only example we have in Jewish law where that works. The other only example is tshuva, is repentance, where you can actually transform the past. It works retroactively. The theory behind how it works retroactively is that when you do tshuva, you're returning to God. That's what tshuva means, returning to God. God's name, his essential name, has 4 letters in it, a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey. Those 4 letters have in it the 3 tenses, past, haya, present, hoveh, and future, yihiyeh, was, is, will be, all consolidated into one word, because God is beyond time. God is like looking at a movie, but looking at all the different scenes at the same time. So he could play around with any part of the movie at will. So when you do tshuva, you're connecting to that part of God that transcends time, and therefore you're in control of the past as well. Now, Rabbi Soloveitchik also explains about the future formula. Why are we renouncing the vows of the future? Because if you have the ability to guarantee that you won't do anything wrong in the future, and you don't take advantage of that, that means you're not sincere. If I have some button I could push, this button will guarantee that I won't say anything negative about another person. I won't speak lashon hara. I just have to push that button and it'll guarantee, and I said, no, I'm not going to push that button. That means you're not so sincere about that commitment not to do it. There is a button you can push that you won't violate any vows and oaths. That button is Kol Nidre. So that's a sign that your commitment for the future is not just words, it's not just lip service, but it really is sincere. Now, the 2 opinions he explains, the opinion that says you should annul the vows of the past, and the other opinion that says you should annul the vows of the future, he says they're arguing about which is more important in tshuva. Is regret for the past more important, or acceptance for the future? The one who says that you have to annul the vows of the past focuses on deal with your past. Show that you really regret it. You're embarrassed by what you did. Get away from your past by focusing on what you did wrong in the past. The other opinion says no, the focus should be about the future. It's about your resolve for the future. Now I'll give you a few original reasons for Kol Nidre. What do most people do in a new year, even in the secular world? They make resolutions. When am I going to start my diet? Tomorrow. That's how most people make resolutions. And that's the big mistake. Tshuva has to be now. If you're really sincere, you change today, now. And in fact, many places the Torah uses the word now. And now, what is God asking of you? And the Midrash says, whenever the Torah uses the word now, it refers to tshuva. Because everything else, there's no rush. You can always do something a day later. But when it comes to tshuva, it has to be immediate. Because if it's a resolution for the future, that means that you're really reserving the time and the ability for you to continue sinning. Yes, sometimes in the future I'll stop. And that's why we annul the vows by saying, I'm not making any commitments. I don't need to make commitments. I'm changing right now. A commitment is something you're going to do tomorrow. Then we have another possible explanation of Kol Nidre. Why do people make vows? In the Torah, when it talks about people making vows, and the Talmud talks about it, there's a whole tractate of the Talmud. One of the major works of the Talmud is just about vows. Why do people make vows? It's a support, it's a crutch. Let's say a person wants to refrain from eating a certain food. I don't know why I'm focusing on food.
Was this before Yom Kippur?
Someone says, I'm not going to eat any sweets anymore. But they know that they're not going to resist. So what do? They make a vow that they're not going to eat any fruit or any sweets or whatever it is. Now they know if they eat it, they're violating a commandment. It's like stealing, it's like eating pork, it's like any crime that the Torah prohibits. It becomes a crime for just this person because he made this vow. So it's a crutch, because if you had the willpower, you didn't need to rely on that. But, if a person needs a crutch, they should use it. People say that religion is a crutch. If you need a crutch, then absolutely you should use the crutch. Atheism is also a crutch, by the way, because they feel guilty that they don't keep the commandments, they don't behave the right way, so they say, well, I don't have to, I don't believe. So whatever excuses people use are crutches. But if you need the crutch, use it. But it comes Yom Kippur, you don't use the crutch anymore. You don't need the crutch anymore. Because Yom Kippur, you're operating from the very within of your soul, and you have the power there to resist whatever pressures are against you changing. It's like Purim. In the Torah, Yom Kippur is called Yom Kippurim. Kippurim means atonements, plural. I don't know why we change and we use Yom Kippur singular when it's Yom Kippurim, it's plural. But anyhow, the Zohar says that Yom Kippurim means a day like Purim. The Yom Kippur is almost like Purim, but Purim is in a way holier than Yom Kippur. How could that possibly be? In Purim we eat and we drink, and we're not in a state of introspection. So one of the explanations for that is that on Purim, it says we're supposed to drink until we no longer know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. Now that doesn't mean you should become plastered. What it means is that even if you lose your understanding of how evil is bad and goodness is good, you still reject evil and you embrace good. Not because you can philosophize about it, you could rationalize it and explain it. Even if you lose your mind, your gut will tell you what's right, because in Purim you can reach into your very gut. And Yom Kippur is similar to that. Yom Kippur you can reach into your spiritual gut, and that gives you the power that you don't need the crutches anymore. In the booklet my son Yeshua gave out, it has a whole thing about Kol Nidre. A little bit of what's in there I said a few other things. But one of the things he mentions there that I never heard before is that when we cancel our vows, we're hinting to God. God, get the hint. You also made promises. Promises, on one hand, that are negative, that we're going to languish in exile, we're going to suffer, we're going to be punished for all of our infractions. We're going to be punished, and all the threats to us for our lack of proper behavior. God, it's about time you nullify your own vows. Enough of it. We had enough suffering and pain. And cancel and sever the ropes that bind us to exile. Because when we're in exile, it's like we're connected in a way that we can't sever our connection. And we say to God, sever our connection. So although I said before at the outset that Kol Nidre is not a prayer, it really is a prayer. Subliminally, we're praying to God to cut His own ropes that He created that bind us to exile, bind us to negativity. Now, the question I want to end with, why did the focus change? We used to focus on the past, annulling the past vows, and now we focus on Kol Nidre, on the future vows. The truth is you can do both, and actually there is a custom that many people follow that the day before Rosh Hashanah we annul the past vows and the future vows, and Yom Kippur is a repetition of one part of that. So why do we repeat one part, the part about the future, not the part about the past? So it has to do, I think, with the change that we experience in the last few decades or centuries. One might think we're living in the most free time, most convenient time. We have all the amenities. And so therefore, we're much more protected. The truth is, we're much more vulnerable, more than ever before, and we're much more fragile than ever before. We are probably the most fragile generation in history. I can't imagine what would happen if all of a sudden we'd lose the amenities that we have because of modern technology, if we'd lose the internet. You know how many kids would go crazy? And I'm not exaggerating. It's an addiction, no less than an addiction to drugs. And imagine if we'd lose electricity and plumbing and modern plumbing, and that there would be, the mass suicide rate would be astronomical. We are much more fragile as a people than ever before, and compounded by the length of the exile. Jews have been pleading with God, bring an end to this exile, bring us Mashiach for millennia. And as the time goes on, you become more and more disillusioned and more incapable of coping. As such, we can't afford to focus too much on the past. Even when you do tshuva, yes, you have to focus on the past. You can't completely eliminate that. But the focus should be mostly on the future. Even when you focus on the future, you have to deal with your past, but the attitude has to be, I'm working on my future. I don't know about my past, I can deal with it, maybe one thing at a time. The Rebbe once said that a Jew could come to God and say to God, look God, I'm ready to change one part of my behavior. I can't change everything. So let me deal with one part of my behavior. And God says, yes, fine, that's great, that's wonderful. Because if we try to tackle every issue that we have in our past, it's going to be so overwhelming, so crushing, that it'll just destroy us. We don't have the strength to do that. Now, there are individuals who can do it, but the Torah and our practice is geared to the majority, to the public, not just to individuals. So even though tshuva and vows, you have to have remorse for the past, you have to deal with your past, but the focus today should be mostly on the future. And it has to do with the difference between you're in the middle of the journey and you're coming to the end of the journey. When you come to the end of the journey, the focus has to be on the future. There's a famous parable given. The Talmud says that people shouldn't try to predict when Mashiach is coming. And yet the medieval rabbis did do it. They gave predictions when it would happen. So someone asked, why are they giving predictions when the Talmud says you shouldn't give predictions? So there was a famous rabbi known as the Malbim, who wrote a classic commentary on the Tanakh. So he gave an example with a parable. He says a father is going on a trip with his young son, and they just left an hour ago, and the son says to the father, Dad, are we there yet? Anyone who had children knows that that's the question that's always asked on a trip. And the father says, no, we just left an hour ago. This is a long trip. 2 hours later, again, are we there yet? And the father becomes very, very upset. He's exasperated. He says, please stop asking, are we there yet? Finally, when they get to their destination, and the father starts talking about the destination, and the kid says, I thought we don't ask the questions like that. We don't talk about the destination. He says, that's when we're on the highway, on the journey. Once we reach close to our destination, that's what we should focus on. Make sure the last turn that you have to make is the right turn, not the left turn. So now as we get closer to the future, now is the time to focus more about the future and not on the past. When we're dealing with our journey, we have to make sure we had the right, we didn't have all the baggage, the negative baggage, so we had to deal with our past. Now we have to deal with the future. Because in truth is, as we go from Mount Sinai, when God gave us the plan for the world, and the Messianic age, when the plan is fulfilled, that journey is like a circle. as we distance ourselves from Sinai, we become less and less affected by Sinai. But then as we come closer and closer to the end, we become even more inspired because we're closer to the fulfillment of Sinai than we ever were. So as we go away from Sinai, we're coming back to it as in a circle. And therefore, the focus has to be on the end of this journey, not so much the past. And therefore, when we annul the vows, we're focusing mostly on the future vows. We're preparing for the future rather than trying to deal with our negative past. Focus on the positive and then the future. And that's been the philosophy of the Rebbe, even with regard to the Holocaust. After the Holocaust, the bulk of the Jewish community, the organized Jewish community, were obsessed with the Holocaust. And I can't blame them. That's what the Jewish world experienced. And the Holocaust became the subject around which all of Jewish life revolved. The Rebbe took a totally different approach. The Rebbe said, as much as we have to never forget what happened in the Holocaust, the Rebbe lost his brother, he lost his grandmother, he lost his brother-in-law, his sister-in-law, he lost many relatives, and many other people very close to him. Yet the Rebbe says, keep it in the back of your mind, but the focus has to be on rebuilding the Jewish people, rebuilding Judaism, not wallowing in the past, because if you wallow in the past, you'll become a posthumous victim of the past. I told the story many times. Once one of my sons was going around, as we'll do in this holiday of Sukkot, with a lulav and esrog, and asking a woman to make the blessing over it, and most Jews are very happy to do that, and she said, I won't do it because of the Holocaust. So my son came back to me and said, what should I have told her? I said, you should have told her that if Hitler wouldn't have known that 60, 70 years after the Holocaust, Jews are still not practicing their Judaism because of him, he'd be delighted. He'd be dancing in his grave that he not only murdered 6 million Jews and destroyed Jewish communities in his lifetime, but he's continuing to do it. You're giving him a posthumous victory. The way to fight Hitler and to fight the Holocaust is by going in the opposite direction. And that's why our focus on Yom Kippur is mostly on the future, because that's the direction we have to go, because we're close to the end, and that's what's going to uplift us, and that will make sure that we will have a good year. May everyone be sealed for a good and sweet year. Gemar Chatima Tova.